Hi, welcome back to the Shifting Schools podcast. My name is Tricia Friedman, and this week I'm all by myself with an extraordinary guest. Jeff is going to be bummed that he missed this conversation because we're talking about play, creativity, and the art of facilitation. Listeners, if you are curious about ways that we can be more playful in our facilitation of learning and getting to know one another, this week's guest, I think, is absolutely going to delight. Our guest this week is Joel Birch, who happens to be a certified facilitator and pro trainer of Lego Serious Play. We debrief on a Lego Serious Play walkthrough that Joel guided me on. Joel's also an educator, a learning designer, a songwriter, and he's even been known to dabble in stand-up comedy. When you head over to the show notes, you're going to be able to learn more about ways to connect with Joel. And after our conversations, I think you're absolutely going to be inspired to do just that. Before we dig into our engaging conversation, we do have a quick word from our show sponsor.
Shifting Schools is excited to be sponsored by newlight.io. Their platform is designed to simplify MTSS frameworks for personalized student support. Built by leading experts, New Light focuses on getting educators the answers they need fast. Which students need which levels of support. With simple data collection and insightful analytics powered by AI, New Light's platform provides actionable solutions to support your students effectively. Try it for free at newlight.io. That's NEULIGHT.io. Check the link in the show notes to learn more.
Shifting Schools and Crayola believe that creative teaching helps students become future ready. Join Matthew McConaughey, Ada Limon, Mo Willems, and 7 million students around the globe for Crayola Creativity Week, January 27th through February 2nd, 2025. Sign up for access to free learning resources, celebrity videos, daily giveaways, and more at Crayola.com/creativityweek.
And with that, please welcome to the show one of my favorite humans and educators, the remarkable Joel Birch. Joel, I am in such a better place now that I've been chatting with you for about 30 minutes. Listeners, we've just wrapped up my first ever Lego Serious Play experience. Joel's a facilitator of that. For those of you who are watching the podcast, you can see the little model that I built. Joel opened things up with a question. I was trying to tell a story with Lego. I'd love to open our conversation with how facilitating Lego Serious Play, you're a musician. You also, have some experience doing stand-up comedy. I'm wondering to what extent your experience in the arts you feel like really carries over as a skill set. Listeners, I've got to say, he was so generous, so kind in taking me through it because I, full disclosure, messaged you and I'm terrified of what this is going to be like. But I really felt comfortable and I had such an enjoyable experience. Have you taken things from the world of composing music and getting up on stage and telling jokes into this work?
I would say rock and roll and comedy give me a sense of what not to do when I'm facilitating. Part of it is in the way I do comedy is very much to very quickly earn an audience's trust. But when I'm doing comedy, I earn their trust so that I can tactically shatter it. And in rock and roll, I'm there to be in their face and to make a whole lot of noise. Yeah, facilitation, I think it's the strange midpoint between that and my background between those things and my background as a teacher. In, I would say, absolutely every single workshop, someone that walks in terrified about what they're going to be able to build and whether they can cut it. And in every single case, by the end of the first build, they have something amazing to say. Midway through the first question, they're the ones that are up on their elbows, leaning over the Lego bags, diving in, following their thought process. So I can't remember where the rest of that was going, but yeah, it's the I've definitely taken a lot from teaching, and I've definitely taken a lot from I've taken bits and pieces from performance. Actually, an old friend of mine that I used to facilitate a lot of workshops with, he pointed out something to me one time. He said, do you realize you have this mannerism that when you've had a group out doing something independent and you want them to come back together, you take 3 steps forward and your last step is you stamping your foot? I said, no, I didn't realize I do it, but I know exactly where it comes from, because as in my frontman days, my thing would be, as there is the cue to step up to the chorus, it would be 3 steps forward and that last foot is up on top of the foldback speaker. So I'm yet to facilitate a workshop in schools where I have a foldback speaker to jump up on.
And that opportunity might come. And for folks who are listening to us and are thinking, wait a second, I don't understand. Lego serious play for adult learners. On this show, we've talked a lot about the power of play. And this is yet another opportunity into it. And I am someone who would say I strongly value play. And yet I still felt nervous going into this, but you have me realizing like it's another way of communicating. It's also another way of thinking critically, of just getting creative, getting out of my own head almost. Can you talk to people about the application of this in a team? We went through and did this one-on-one, but can you set the stage? What does this look like in a group? When you're facilitating this, what are you seeing in the participants' eyes, or what's coming out of their mouth as the result of going through this?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time in designing these sessions. Like I talk about getting to just the right altitude in the questions that I frame. Like I want to zoom out far enough that I can ask a question that captures the topic in a way that everyone at the table is going to be able to look in on it from their unique vantage point, so that no one has to have all the answers. They have to have their unique contribution to it. And what we get then is every single person at the table understanding a far bigger picture than they came in with, because you just leave nowhere for assumptions to hide. And you end up with, and that's before you even look at elements of worldview and just personality and personal perspective. So yeah, you end up with a much, much bigger picture. And people quite often come out of a session saying to me, I feel like I understand what this conversation is actually about now, not just what I thought it was about.
When you're positing a question, this is not people talking it through. This is not me sitting down, writing notes. This is really me thinking in a tactile way with the Lego parts that I have available. And I want to say that's like an interesting blend of restrictive, but also completely open at the same time. I'm really thinking about the difference that this made in a conversation where there's a question, there's quiet making time, and then the answer is almost like an indirect response. It's not the typical way that leaders or educators would get together and converse. And now I'm realizing like, wow, we need different modes of coming together around a question.
Yeah. So I love it because the question is really just there as a stimulus and a prompt. And this is something that I've talked about with other Lego Serious Play facilitators as to whether you're a question person or a build prompt person. So I know like some other facilitators, their style is much more to go, hey, build a model that illustrates what courage means in decision making. And others will frame that as a question. So yeah, and I think the outcome of either approach is very much the same, because the method invites you to really just take that and run with it in your own way. And you end up with these wonderfully expressive models with wonderfully expressive stories. And yeah, like very quickly, I think because you're aiming to, you give people a pretty accessible medium and you're asking them a pretty high level question about something that they're good at. So you sneak them into their flow state pretty quickly. And I get accused a lot of getting people out of their comfort zones. And I don't see it like that at all. I see it more like using this playful environment to roll out a temporary comfort zone underneath them. It's that whole thing of comfort comes from the Latin meaning with strength. And I want my clients approaching these big conversations and these big decisions that they have to make with strength. So I'm going to help them out by rolling a temporary comfort zone out underneath them, helping them to have this big conversation, wrestle with some big ideas, have everything find its right place. And then once they've had that conversation with strength, I can roll up my temporary little comfort zone and take it with me. And they've already done the hard stuff, so they're in a better spot than they were.
Yeah, I almost felt like, listeners, the question that Joel posed to me was, in 2024, what's sort of an unsung benefit to being a school leader? And knowing that I was going to respond through Lego, I almost felt like it was disarming. I didn't have to have this perfectly articulated answer with data or research. Like, I was completely, really free to have a playful response to it and to just get out of my default, which felt liberating. And there was this kind of side effect of literally I was just playing with Lego for a few minutes too, which is not something I have done in a very long time. And it felt good. Like the emotional response to the question, if you had said, we're just going to have a conversation, Tricia, I'm going to ask you to answer it, it wouldn't have been a felt good. I think it would have been a pressure to have something smart to say.
And it would have had references.
Yes, like with references. I'm wondering if that's something that you hear from folks, or you even notice in teams that maybe different people are feeling better invited into the conversation because the way in which they're communicating is so different than a typical meeting.
Yeah, I think part of something that's really core to the method, and certainly it's a huge part of the way I've embraced the method, is that it is designed to give absolutely everyone the chance to get the entirety of their thoughts out and in the mix, rather than kind of leaving the direction of conversation in the hands of the people who talk first. So, yeah, it is really nice for that fact that, yeah, you are, I think, disarming, great description for it. You're approaching it in a different way. I always ask my clients to provide the element of surprise wherever possible. And people don't see the questions that I'm going to ask them beforehand, unless, except for maybe one or two people in the room who are the ones who have had to sign off on the agreement,
right,
and help me plan the workshop. Although yesterday I worked with the leadership team of a big K-12 independent school here, and I said to them beforehand, can I just, since you're a small group and since it's the leadership team, can I just show you a broad overview of where we're going and give you the topics of conversation hour by hour, but not show you the questions? And they said, yeah, I think that will work better. We'll trust you with that.
Right.
And it works beautifully.
Shifting Schools and Crayola believe that creative teaching helps students become future ready. Join Matthew McConaughey, Ada Limon, Mo Willems, and 7 million students around the globe for Crayola Creativity Week, January 27th through February 2nd, 2025. Sign up for access to free learning resources, celebrity videos, daily giveaways, and more at Crayola.com/creativityweek.
I'm super curious. I know that you do this work with different audiences. What have you learned in terms of, maybe it seems to me that it should be obvious that K-12 education, there's so much research around the benefit of play. We should have an openness to having this kind of experience. And yet, like, I will fully admit, I was nervous. I felt intimidated going into it. What kind of are you noticing around maybe either K-12 versus corporate, or Are there generational differences, or are we more similar in our coming into Lego serious play than I'm assuming?
More similar than we are different. Generally, it works pretty well because I think it taps into us in quite a human way. We've been using our hands as a species. We've been using our hands for far longer than we've had language. So, it makes the most of that. We've been creating visual artifacts for far longer than we've had spoken language. So it gives that a place at the table. Grown-ups use their words. So, why sideline the more established human parts of ourselves? When we could not. Yeah, I think in one sense we are more similar than we are different. Something I did notice early on, because I've been doing this since early 2019. Something I did notice early on was that corporates took to it a little bit quicker. And I had a bit of a trust barrier with play to overcome in education. What I put it down to was the fit your own oxygen mask before helping others effect. So I brought it into schools, and immediately there was this I need to take notes because I want to do this with my students, because play is something my students do, and I've got too much work to do. And so it took a little bit of gently trying to reassure while also saying, hey, you know what? This works way better on adults than it does on kids. It's not to say it can't work on kids, but if you want to do this in your school, let's talk a little bit more about that. And your school is also full of adults, so get the hang of it where it's definitely going to work well, and then from that place of strength, work out what it can look like with your students. But yeah, I think to address the question of how we are similar and different, everyone complains about silos. Everyone complains about collaboration being a great ideal, but difficult to pull off in practice. Everyone struggles with communication and getting communication right, because right is a nebulous thing in and of itself. Yeah.
And then there's, I think, the constant conversation around teams better appreciating the human, not just the colleague, but the person that the colleague is. And I would imagine that doing this with a team, you've mentioned when you go into a school or a corporation, it's not just a one-off build, but it's multiple builds. And I'm guessing there's so much interpersonal learning that occurs when I am seeing the person who I've probably never seen before tell a story through Lego, and just seeing metaphors that they come up with, maybe also seeing them go through that experience of that disarming evolution that I described. Aside from the other benefits, I'm wondering if you feel like teams are emerging with a better understanding of who the people are that make up their team.
Yeah, I think definitely. And I think they come out with a better understanding of each other. And yeah, you definitely see that through the way they express themselves, and the way over 2 or 3 hours that expression evolves and grows. You get this wonderful electric little effect sometimes where there will be a common language that starts to emerge on the table, because every build we do will flow into something else and it will become part of a broader conversation. Always begin with an individual build to give everyone that chance to share in a very egalitarian sort of way. You don't have those effects of someone who is more senior taking more time talking than the graduate, or someone who just has a big personality doing all the talking. Because what I love about it is that it gives people like me a dedicated time to shut our mouths once we've finished talking about the model that we've built, and then the quiet person sitting next to me a dedicated chance to speak up. And it's only once all those stories have been heard that you move on to something collective. And some of those collective techniques look like finding a shared experience or approaching something that looks a bit like consensus. And other times it's about finding the balance and interplay between things.
I appreciated too, you mentioned, and I'm autistic, that when I'm presenting the story, the focus is not eye contact. The focus was on what I built.
Yes.
Which also, there's a whole other layer of accessibility there. I'm wondering too, if you want to talk about, some folks might assume when you're doing this work with organizations that it must be in person. But I didn't feel like, I'd love to be in the same room with you, Joel, but doing this virtually actually was super powerful. Like I didn't necessarily feel like there was a deficit to the experience because we were doing it virtually. Do you want to talk about the ways in which actually, sure, like this works virtually as it does in person?
Yeah. I think there are parts of it that almost work better online. And we chatted about this earlier. There is no literal eye contact in a virtual call. And when we come to talk about our models, we just center it in the camera and move it around and point to it. And because one of the huge parts of the etiquette is we listen with our eyes. And it's really easy to enforce that and it's really easy to enforce, don't try and make eye contact with me, when you can't even see my eyes because there's Lego in the way. So yeah, I think there are certain types of conversations that really lend themselves beautifully to doing them online. When you come to do something, particularly so when I was talking about the collective play techniques where you're working with where you're building a shared model. So you've built yours, I've built mine, and we remove pieces from our individual models and build them together into a shared, something that has a shared story in it. That one's a little bit harder to pull off. There are definitely people who do it, and they do it very well. That is not something I excel at. But then there are other things where, if you're collectively doing things where you need to visualize balance and influence and that sort of thing, you throw it into a whiteboarding tool and you can move these. You throw your photos into a whiteboarding tool and you can move them around almost as well, at least in a rough enough way that you get the idea and you develop the ideas. Yeah, you can do that stuff online.
Yeah, I'm realizing too, I might not necessarily feel the same pressure. Like I couldn't see what you were building while we were having the building session. And actually that to me was a bonus. I think I would have gotten intimidated. What's Joel doing? I want to see, am I doing it right?
That's why we always have a practice run when I build with people in the room. But we'll always have a zero stakes, fun bonding build at the start where the name of the game is to experience the process. And you'll invariably, at a table of 6 or 7 people, because the whole thing is built on building with metaphors and then telling a story about the model that you've built, you will invariably at the table have someone who builds something quite straight-laced and procedural and literal. So if I ask them to build a model that just shows me what's important to you, someone will build something where they'll have a brick like this that represents the ocean because that's just how they find calm in the world. They might have something like this on top. They love their home and this is my partner and they're incredible. And we love our dog. Someone might build something like that. And then someone else might go on this big deep dive into character, and different colors will represent different elements of their personality. And there will be pieces that represent stages of their life, or the notion of a door that could be a threshold between stages. They'll really go somewhere big with it. And then everyone else will sit somewhere in between those two and with a mix of them. And that first share that there is no stake in it for the work that they do or the problems that they're in the room to solve. It's just there for them to go. For the people who went quite literal and abstract, who might have been a little bit self-conscious about, quite literal and procedural. They might have been a little bit self-conscious about putting something deeper or a bit more sideways in there. And for the people who went really abstract, it's nice for them to be able to go, oh yeah, I could have put the dog in and it would have been fine.
But it's definitely, I think, a really great way to, again, have some insight into how others make choices and also interpret a question. And these are, I think, one of the things that's so difficult in education is I think there's not a whole lot of transparency or opportunities for transparency just in learning the way one another come to design a lesson or an experience for students. And I feel like a lot of it becomes an instinctual thing too, right? And this is also very instinctual. Now, Joel, you're trained in this. You also train facilitators. And I want to put some emphasis on, I love this practice, yet I would not lead this practice in a group. And I think sometimes like role play was something for a very long time that it was always like set up. Not everybody has the skill set to actually do that. And sometimes role play can go horrifically wrong. I wonder if you want to talk a little bit more about that, becoming a facilitator. And there were so many things that you did, even in our brief introduction, where it's like, yes, like it's thoughtful, it's by design in a way that maybe participants aren't even aware of. Do you want to talk more about the work that you do, helping others become a facilitator? And then, sorry to pile the questions on you like Lego. What is the benefit of becoming a facilitator? Like, I have lots of thoughts on what I imagine they would be, but you've been doing this for so long that I know you're going to have thoughts I'm not even coming up with. Again, do this if you know what you're doing. And what does it mean to learn how to do this?
Yeah, so I think for me, I came to it because I had been working with a whole lot of different schools doing kind of strategic decision-making sort of things where it was complex. There were complex decisions to make. And the conventional ways that we had to approach them always left something out, or you'd forget something, or something would struggle to fit. And I really loved this from what I'd seen of it, that it allowed everything to have a physical presence. And if something needed to move to accommodate something important, but that was not an easy fit, could physically move around the table, and you would find the ways to work with that. For me, it was adding on to my existing facilitation skills and my existing, I'd done a lot in my classroom with inquiry learning. So it was all like, I was already pretty good at framing a big question and wording it in such a way that it will invite the interesting answer that every individual at the table has to bring to it. Yeah, so from there, it was like I went self-taught for the first 6 months or so. There is an open source document that you can get your hands on and take the thing for a spin. And once I tested it out as a small part of some things I was running socially with some friends, I thought, okay, this has some legs. I think I might dive a little bit deeper. Even as I was in the elevator on the way up to where I trained, I wasn't 100% certain that I wasn't joining a cult. And I've said that to the trainer that I trained with. We chat quite often. So for me, it was really just that, wanting to deepen my practice with it, wanting to really dig in. And I think I got a bit lost there. This would be a good bit to edit out.
No, not at all. But I think I can imagine, again, you have such a background and breadth of experience with creativity as a practice that the average person maybe does not have. So for someone who is saying, I would love to get that formal experience and training, I'm imagining it's almost like one of those things where every school should almost have an in-house trained facilitator. How big of a lift are we talking about? Is this PhD level effort, or what is that process like?
Really, it's like when Yoda leads Luke to that cave on Dagobah, and Luke says, "What's in there?" And Yoda says, "Only what you bring with you." So it's the kind of thing where what I love about the method is that it is broad and open enough that you can very much bring your own character to it and your own perspective on it. And there's a handful of us in Perth where I live, and some clients are going to vibe much better with one of those other facilitators, and some of them are going to vibe with me. We've all got our own spin on it and our own approach to it. So I think that's a really cool thing. And it's also frustrating it introduces some frustration in that it can be a victim of its own flexibility in trying to explain it to others. So I find myself drinking a lot of coffee with a bag of Lego on the table and just demonstrating as much as I can so that people experience the process. They also experience my approach to the process. And then from there, when it comes to actually training as a facilitator, that also comes down to what you're looking to get out of it and what you're looking to do with it. So yeah, there are people that want to go and just facilitate in a really broad way like I do. There are people who want to bring a particular focus to it, and maybe they work in an organization in kind of an innovation sort of role, and they want to really, as you were saying, build that creativity as a practice. And like that's something I come across quite a lot. I think the English language kind of lets us down with the way we approach creativity, in that we very much conflate creative to mean the same thing as artistic.
Mm-hmm.
And they're separate things. Like everyone is creative, not everyone is artistic. And like the way I describe that is, like everyone, like not everyone can compose music or do wonderful visual art and all that sort of thing, but everyone has bought too much on a holiday and creatively packed their suitcase so that everything actually fits and gets through the luggage check.
Yeah. I love that. I feel like you're describing my approach to cooking, which sometimes is not great, but would always be creative.
Yeah, if you can do some problem solving on the fly, you are creative.
Hi, folks. We'll get back to our conversation in just a moment. I want to talk a bit more about newlight.io, the AI FERPA compliant, that's our federal guidelines around privacy of student data, platform making personalized student support a breeze. You know, student privacy is huge in our schools, and New Light is big on privacy as well. It was one of the first questions I asked the co-founder, Jose, about. There are a few AI systems out there that meet the requirements to being FERPA compliant, and New Light does just that. New Light's IntelliTier platform is more than just a data collection tool. It's an AI-powered assistant that has been trained to truly understand the MTSS framework, student context, and school-specific resources. Developed by a team with both social, emotional, and behavioral needs in mind, and with plans to extend into academic support soon. Studies show effective MTSS and SEL implementations can boost attendance, improve grades, and increase graduation rates. Yet many schools struggle with the complexities of gathering data and turning that data into actionable items within the MTSS process. New Light's IntelliTier platform makes it easy with simple, fast data collection, asynchronous collaboration across the MTSS team, and actionable insight that educators can implement and document their success with. Plus, New Light is advised by seasoned educators and administrators, so they understand your everyday classroom challenges. You have to try it out for yourself. So head over to newlight.io to give it a try for free. That's NEULIGHT.io. Thank you to New Light for taking this on, and a proud sponsor of the Shifting Schools community.
But at the end of the day, Joel, I really see the collaboration piece of this. I feel, at least in my work, one of the things that I hear really often is we are in a difficult time of being in schools. There's been so much change. I think that change fatigue is real. And I think the almost like triple layer purpose to this of getting to do something collaborative in a way that is very low stakes. Like I felt like my shoulders, like the tension went loose. And it wasn't
Amazing.
like we spent 10 hours doing this. It really was like play is good for us. I was relaxed. I was relaxed with another human, which is a good thing for us to be doing. It dawns on me that I could see this being an excellent experience for parents and caregivers. No shade at parents and caregivers, but one of the things that I've noticed in some workshops around AI literacy is whenever I'm suggesting some of the things that families can do to play with the technology to better understand it, I think as you mentioned, there is almost still this harmful myth that play is not valuable, right?
Yeah.
I would argue that play is one of the best ways you can learn about emerging technologies. Do you do this work with parents and caregivers? Or if you don't, can you just take listeners through what are some of the contexts that schools partner with you?
Yeah, so I have done a few things with parents and community members in schools. Yeah, not often, just because usually when a school brings me in, they bring me in to work with their educators or their leadership team. But yeah, it is a really fantastic way to have those big conversations with parents, and in a way where their voices are heard, because that's something that, like, I'm a parent at my school and it's at my daughter's school, but yeah, that you don't always feel like your message is getting through, but also part of that is just it's a difficult thing to do, and this does make it a lot easier because you're creating conditions where everyone can get the entirety of their idea out on the table. You can capture that and you can come back to it later.
And then there's also, apologies if this seems superficial, like you are the person who I'm sure is highly skilled at play and always was with your own child. But this is not necessarily an aspect of parenting that I think everybody goes into being a parent with. So I even feel like that as such a critical communication piece. Like for me growing up as a kid, I played a lot of sports, and I would say that was like my primary communication with my dad. We were throwing the ball around, we were practicing sport, and that was like a real foundational build for our relationship. So I could also imagine, again, it's important to remind one another, like this can be a real anchor for different relationships. So I'm wondering if you want to say something about that as well.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about it like that, because my daughter's still really young. So she's very much like this process has really deep roots in a lot of Piaget's work around constructivist learning. I think probably flows on from that into some constructionist learning. And because of that, and because of the abstract thinking that it demands, my daughter's just not quite old enough for her mind to have kicked into that stage yet. But yeah, it's absolutely something I would really love to explore more with parents of older kids, because I think it does do that. It does do that thing of being able to have a more challenging conversation quite easily, because you're not talking eye to eye. I read something this week that like boys will talk to each other shoulder to shoulder, and it's more in that kind of vein, but also the fact that whatever is on your mind, you're distilling it into a physical object that is external to you. And when you come to do something collectively with that, it is invited to move around the table. So there's nothing set in stone about it. And there's an openness to it without needing to force anything. And I think that's where it can do some really wonderful relationship building maintenance.
Yeah, because a lot of parenting experts will often recommend if you have to have a hard conversation, try to do it in the car. Like you're driving, your child is strapped in the car with you. But I don't know if that is actually, this seems like it would be a safer approach. But Joel, I really do hope that 2025 is the year of play, just at a societal level. I think we need it so deeply. For a listener who is thinking, okay, I'm sold, I'd love to try this out, we want to invite Joel into our community, can you just maybe give us a few examples of, hey, I can come in and I can help you with this? Like I think you mentioned teams looking to work on problem solving, but can you just maybe give us a few other, I can come in and we can do XYZ?
Yeah, so a lot of the work I do with schools is around helping them revise strategy. So it's like the process's roots are in developing corporate strategy. So a lot of the stuff that I've done with schools has been doing the high level hearts and minds end of strategic planning. And I'll do that with everyone. We'll get all the teachers, all the support staff in the room at the same time. And table by table, I lead them through these conversations. We capture everything in photos and in videos. And we extract and distill the core story at heart. And then maybe I'll go and work with the leadership team in a more focused sort of way And we'll take the output of that and go, right, from that, what do we need to focus on and how do those things fit together? And what I love about that is that it doesn't put all of your eggs in this Lego Serious Play basket. It still leaves room for, actually, we've got some really easy decisions to make because that's what our data says. And we have formal data that absolutely informs a decision here, but there are some questions around how. And this is a really great way to have a big nuanced conversation around that. I just did a thing yesterday where we were doing a strategy review. So it's with a school at the end of they're coming to the end of a 5-year strategic planning cycle. And they wanted to do a bit of a review of that, cast their mind forward and work out what things might be in play. And we did some really interesting things around who was in their community that really benefited from it and who was at risk of flying under the radar. And it was just, we were able to go really deep. I love the process for how slowly it encourages you to move for a short time. So we've done that sort of thing. What was the other one? I've done job interviews with it, which has been fascinating. So the idea there was to just get behind the written application and get behind that nervous interview persona and just give applicants the opportunity to turn up as their entire self and really interact and be like they're there on a team, simulate working together. And that gets really interesting really quickly because people forget that they're in an interview. And and the people that you really want in your school, they step up when they need to step up, they step back when they need to step back, they listen really well, they focus, they're there, and their empathy is right in the driver's seat. And then you get the people that you might not meet until after they've already signed the contract and their probationary period is over. Yeah, the last time I did this, we were halfway through the first collective stage of the interview workshop, and the principal sidled up to me and she turned her back to the group and just went, "Joel, they're acting like themselves."
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I know, that was the idea. But the other beautiful thing about those interviews is that I was able to design it. So I've worked with a few schools now where there was a large intake of people at once. So 2 brand new schools and one where they just had 3 retirements and 2 maternity leave positions or something, like a whole lot of people at once. And it was always a situation where there were more applicants than there were positions, but we were able to set the interview process itself up where they would be in a room of interesting, excellent peers and colleagues. And I was able to facilitate a couple of hours of them having a big professional conversation that whatever they did next, that experience would charge them up for whatever that was. And a really, really nice thing to be able to leave them with.
I love that. And I think events feel like it makes such perfect sense. Like even a celebration or a big reflection at the end of the year. I feel like often schools will be like, okay, let's revisit our goals from the beginning of the year and then write something on a Post-it note. And no, you're not going to get thoughtful answers. But I do think we communicate so much about how much we really care about an answer by the kind of effort we put into asking it.
Yeah. And I think, greetings and farewells. I think you could do some really wonderful things.
And I'm thinking too, as a former lit teacher, one of the things I'm very happy about with generative AI is I think finally we're realizing the essay is going to have to evolve. We've maybe always put too much emphasis on that as a tool to measure intelligence. And I could even imagine what a great literacy activity this is. Take any of those typical essay-like questions and do a build. The same skills go into having to answer, but it's a much more dynamic process and one that, at this point cannot necessarily be automated. But further than that, it's not something that I would want to automate. Like I would want to do it because you're asking me to play.
Well, that's it. Like you put it into a literature classroom, you pick whatever novel you're studying, build a model that shows what's important to the protagonist.
Yeah.
That'd be fascinating.
Absolutely. I'm even thinking create some sort of like mental model of what the author's process went into like constructing that care. The possibilities are endless. So listeners, for sure, you'll be able to learn all about Joel over there in the show notes. In closing, Joel, I love that you brought up this was something that you were self-taught. Initially, you just experimented with your friends, which I've got some dinner guests coming this weekend, and I'm thinking I might do that too. In closing, for anybody that's thinking, I'd love to test the waters, try it out just with a friend group, can you leave us with some words of advice over how to set up a trial like that?
Yeah, for sure. For starters, you'll find the open source document in the show notes. I'm actually got a link to that. Connect with me and throw some questions at me. I'm always happy to answer those. But yeah, find yourself a big mixed bag of Lego. Make sure it's got some people in it, but don't make them anyone specific. So it's the way I try to construct my kits is to help people tell any story without drawing them to tell any particular story. Mm-hmm. So with the idea that people can be anyone I need them to be, but Iron Man can only be Iron Man. Yeah, and then in framing a question, frame big, but also think appreciative. So look to build to strengths and build on and build forward. So almost take a little bit of an improv mindset where you're inviting some yes ands and build into the positives. And that generally gives you a pretty good start.
Oh, I love that. You're having me realize, as I mentioned, there were things that Joel did in our setup that were intentional. It's because he's an expert. And I'm realizing you offered you and I a question that was bridging, right? Like it was building a little bit of common ground. Thank you for that, because I'm realizing like that's some expert facilitation.
That was intentional.
Yeah. Okay, great. I'm going to be thinking about that question that can be bridging for my dinner guests. Joel, thank you so much for this. I really appreciated it. Listeners, please reach out to Joel.
Yeah, I've been so looking forward to this conversation. So I've had an absolute blast. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you. I'm very, very harassed on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And like listeners, it's always a pleasure to chat with Joel. Yeah. Thank you so much for finally being on the show. I hope this is the first of many conversations.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey there, dedicated listener. If you've made it this far, we know you're passionate about shifting the way education works. And Tricia and I appreciate you. If you loved what you heard today, we'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to rate and review Shifting Schools wherever you listen to podcasts. Those ratings help us reach even more educators just like you. And if you know someone who could benefit from these conversations, please share this episode with them. Just one person. Think of the impact we can make together. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter for even more great content. And if you haven't already, join us at Camp Shifting Schools, where the conversations keep going long after the podcasts end. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and thank you for being part of Shifting Schools.